Alrighty. Apparently, within hours of me recording the my video for Saturday, talking about my theory behind Kari Lake prepping some kind of legal challenge to the election, we got some new news on Arizona that I have yet to discuss. The Assistant Attorney General, or a Assistant Attorney General, I don't know if there's more than one, in the state of Arizona, sent a letter to the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. I believe that's who it was addressed to. It was addressed to somebody in Maricopa County, asking some questions about how the election went and how it was conducted, and that the Attorney General's office has some concerns about it, that there were statutory violations. They talked about the long lines, the machines not working, the box 3 stuff, the whole thing with people, well, once they signed in and then they couldn't vote, and then they said, well, then I want to go vote somewhere else, and they said, well, you're already signed in, and maybe you can sign out and then sign in somewhere else. And apparently that's not true, according to the Attorney General. If you already signed in at one place, you have to stay there, and if you try and go vote somewhere else, your vote is not going to be counted. So essentially, there's a whole laundry list of ways in which Maricopa County screwed things up, and the Attorney General does not think that it is right to certify the results of the election until these problems have been resolved and properly explained. Now, I don't have a ton of confidence in Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich. I could see him being a Trey Gowdy type, who likes to get up there and maybe and yell loud and protest a bunch and then not do anything, and put on a good show. That could very well be what happens here. When Mark Brnovich was running for Senate in this election, I supported Blake Masters over him in the primary. Not that I live in Arizona, but there is a chance here, at least, that Mark Brnovich is sincere. And this was one of his lieutenants who penned this letter, technically, but I'm sure he himself, read it over and made whatever edits he pleased, knowing that this is, going to get a lot of public attention. So I don't know if Maricopa County balks at him, which is what they're going to do. That's what they always do, and they just completely gaslight and ignore this letter. Is the Attorney General going to do anything about it? I don't know. I mean, he did allude to it, or they did allude to it in this letter by saying, well, there are statutory violations. That's a nice way of saying that Maricopa County broke the law when it came to this election. In their conduct to this election, they broke the law, and there should be some consequences for that, right? I mean, we have these election laws. If the laws are broken, how does that affect an election? Frankly, I think that there is maybe a 0.1% chance that the results of this election are overturned, just because the courts don't like to do that, even if it's the right thing to do. Yes, it has happened in the past. In the recent past, there is an example that I talked about in my last video in North Carolina a few years ago, where some Republicans were cheating, and of course that election got thrown out, and they had to redo it, and I think the Republican ended up winning by a bigger margin in the redo election. But as I suspected, the Kari Lake team is putting out a lot of stuff on Twitter today, and talking, and Kari Lake herself just put out a recorded statement a couple hours ago, talking about how the fight's not over, and we're getting the lawyers are on it and all this stuff. And apparently, the RNC lawyers are saying that 60% of the locations of the ballot, what do they call them, ballot centers or voting centers, they don't have voting precincts in Maricopa County. It's very screwy, but 60% of the voting centers that the Republican lawyers visited and observed, they claim, had tabulator issues and were not working, and had very long lines. And so therefore, now they only visited about half of the voting centers in Maricopa County. So there's two ways of looking at that. You could say, well, they visited, of the ones they visited, 60% had issues. And if you extrapolate that, for the size of the whole county, well, then 60% of the whole county, you would think, would have issues. It's not necessarily the case. I mean, that is a very big sample size if it's a random sample, but my guess is that this was not a random sample of voting centers. I would assume that they went to ones that they thought were going to have issues, ones that they were worried about. If they could only visit about half of the voting centers, you would think that these attorneys would prioritize the ones where they thought they were going to get the most action. So let's just take it at face value and say that none of the voting centers that they didn't visit had issues. If everything went fine at all the voting centers that the Republican lawyers didn't visit, well, then you've got about 30% of the polling places in Maricopa County having issues. And when you consider that, as I said before, more than 1.5 million people voted in Maricopa County, do you think that 30% of the polling places having issues where they couldn't count ballots and where they had, 3-hour-long lines and people having to get out of line and leave and not being able to vote, do you think that could have affected in a county where there was already, at the end of the day, over 1.5 million votes? Do you think that could have prevented 17,000 people, a very small number of people, from voting? I think it's a very reasonable case to make. And I just don't see what difference it's going to make for them in court. Nevertheless, I want them to pursue this to the fullest extent, because it could be instructional at the very least. It could, they could sow as much doubt as possible, which is always a good thing. And and I say this as someone who's, I'm not fond of democracy to begin with. This is not something that I think is, inherently a good thing. So as far as I'm concerned, undermining confidence in the elections is good and fine. So as I said before, I assume that what they're waiting on for filing lawsuits is they are trying to get as many affidavits as possible. Something that Carrie Lake said today is that she said they have whistleblowers who are coming forward, presumably people who worked in Maricopa County elections, who might be able to give some testimony regarding how many people were impacted by these irregularities, let's call them. I'll be honest, if I were in Lake's position, I don't think I'd have the energy to go through this, because that the deck is stacked against you, and as far as I'm concerned, there is a margin of fraud in elections. It varies, from state to state, but if you want to win, you just have to overcome that margin of fraud, and if you don't, that's part of the game, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think elections, even if they're real clean, I don't think that they're a great way of picking leaders anyway. I don't think that they're any more legitimate than back when you used to have the old, the noblemen elect the new king, in medieval Germany. And so, if you cheat in elections to get your guy in, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's just part of the process. And so if you want to beat people who are cheating, you got to cheat harder. But maybe you could say part of that is using the law to try and right things after the fact. But at that point, you're on defense, and playing defense. If you're playing defense, you're not winning. So we'll see where this goes. I don't have high hopes, but I do think that this is necessary and important, and hopefully educational. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.